You've been on the receiving end of cancellation, as you said, for almost 20 years. And this begs the same question that I brought up earlier, is that why do you think, under those conditions, given the treatment that you've received, that the left is salvageable? Or do you revert to the idea, well, that's what we have to work with, and you're going to do what you can to revitalize the Democrat Party? Because it isn't obvious to me that this cancel culture phenomenon has gone so far that it isn't obvious to me how it can be turned around.
I don't think everybody on the left is, has co-signed counterculture. I think that's, it's a vocal. I think it's probably a vocal minority. I don't know. I have no reason. I have no reason to say that other than just that's my feeling. But I don't think most people think that way. That you should. I mean, it's anti-American. You don't. We should be courageous enough and confident enough of our viewpoint that we can argue them and have them triumph in the marketplace of ideas. And the way that you deal with, with viewpoints that you don't like or that you believe are inaccurate is not through censorship, but, with argument and more information and, and facts. And that's how we've always functioned. It's a critical part. It's a critical foundation stone for democracy. This idea that the free flow of information is the water, it's the sunlight, it's the fertilizer for democracy. And if you cut it off, democracy itself will wither and die. There's just never been a time in history when when the good guys were the people who were censoring stuff. They're always the bad guys. And we know that. We read, Orwell, and we read Aldous Huxley, and we read, all of the great thinkers who were warning us from when we were little kids that, the censors are bad. And when you start censoring people, then you're on the slippery slope to totalitarianism. I mean, in 1977, liberals in our country strongly supported the ACLU for going to bat for the Nazis who were walking through Skokie, Illinois, on a march through a Jewish neighborhood. And, we understood that we could be appalled by the things they were saying, but at the same time, that it was important for them to be able to say it. Because if somebody can shut them up, they can shut us up.
Well, I think your claim that it's a minority of radicals on the leftist side, I think the data supports that quite clearly. But okay, so let me tell you two stories and tell me what you think about this. So, when the Democrats I worked with in the U.S. in California, I had a conversation with them one day. Very intelligent people, by the way, about Antifa, and they were on about QAnon and about right-wing radical groups, and they regarded them as entirely real and entirely credible threats. And that was partly as a consequence of the January 6th occurrences, let's say. And so I said, well, what do you guys think of Antifa? And they said, well, they don't really exist. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because you think the right-wing conspirators exist, but you don't think the left-wing. But like I said, they were smart people, so I investigated further. And they said, well, it has no centralized organization. It's not a formal group. It's a very small minority of people, and it's extremely loosely structured, and it isn't representative of even the radical left, much less the centrist Democrats. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So then I went and talked to Andy No, who's a journalist who's covered Antifa in more detail than anyone else in the world, and who knows their organizational structure and their routines inside and out, and who's put his life on the line to cover this sort of this Antifa activity. And I asked him, how many Antifa cells do you think there are in the United States? And he said, well, there's probably about 20. And I said, well, how many full-time equivalent employees, so to speak, how many people do you think are in each cell that are dedicating themselves to the Antifa cause? And he said, well, maybe 40. And I said, oh, so that's 800 people. So that's 1 in 400,000. And, well, that's almost none. And so you could take that data and you could take the case, you could make the case the Democrats made, which is, well, the Antifa doesn't even exist. It's 1 in 400,000, in a city of 1 million, there'd be 2 Antifa members who were full-fledged, committed, full-time advocates. But then you think, well, look at all the damage those people did. And then you think, well, maybe it only takes a trivial minority of people who are off the rails to cause a tremendous amount of damage. That's what happened when the Soviets took over the Russian society in the aftermath of the monarchies after World War I. It was a tiny percentage of people. And this is what made me worried on the Democrat side. So this is why when I went to Washington, I pushed the Democrats that I talked to. He said, well, when do you think the left goes too far? And so let me ask you that question, like fairly bluntly. You're trying to pull the Democrats to the center. You think it's a salvageable enterprise, and you think it's necessary to salvage it. It's a 2-party system. It's half the country. When do you think the left goes too far? And how would you, in your administration, draw a line between those who are reasonable and who show common sense and those who have gone off the rail? Where is off the rail on the leftist side?
Well, under what circumstance would I be called upon to make that determination?
Well, okay, I could. Okay, so when the Biden administration took office, one of the things I also discussed with the Democrats I knew was how the positions that were going to be filled, that were now vacant because of the transition in the presidency, how those positions would be filled and who would they be filled with. And one of the things I was told was that there was a dearth of available bodies on the Democrat side. And it's hard to get people involved in politics. And so that many of the positions were filled by people whose views were quite radical in comparison to the centrist, into the, say, mainstream centrist Democrat ideal. And so, and I see this as, I would say Kamala Harris is a good example of that, because I think Kamala Harris is inexcusably radical. She tweets out support for the notion of equity nonstop. And equity is not equality of opportunity. And so, I think you'll be called on to make those decisions. For example, if you did establish a presidency, when you were trying to figure out who was going to make up the bulk of your administration, and I know Democrats, because they like the free flow of ideas, have a hard time drawing distinguishing lines. And so they have a hard time distinguishing the centrists from the radicals, but they have been captured in many ways by the radical viewpoint. And it's very dangerous. You've been subject to that to some degree on the censorship side. And so I've not seen the Democrats contend seriously with the problem of how to differentiate the mainstream centrists from the dangerous radicals. And they seem to continue enabling them. I've seen that right now on the trans front, for example. Norway and Finland and Sweden and Holland and the UK have now banned gender transition surgery for minors. And yet it's still being promoted assiduously, for example, in California by Gavin Newsom. And I think that's criminal, personally. I think it's inexcusable. And that's a good example of the capture of the Democrats by the radicals, in my estimation. So it's a curious problem.
I have so many people right now who are flocking to my campaign that are high quality people that whose views about life and politics I respect. Some of them are Republicans, some of them are independents, some of them are Democrats. And I don't have any anxiety about being able to fill all the key positions in my administration with people who have, who I think have a common sense approach to life.
Okay, so you think you have a talent pool at hand that is broad enough so that you can find people who are qualified enough to occupy the centrist position appropriately and pull the Democrats back to, something more approximating the ideals, let's say, of the latter part of the 20th century as opposed to now. Okay, so let me ask you another question then. There are these ideas on the left that are troublesome, let's say. What do you think the central ideas on the left, what are the central ideas on the left that are troublesome in your estimation?
What I try to focus on, Jordan, is the values that Americans hold in common rather than, getting caught up in these issues that drive people apart. So that, I don't want to do finger pointing. If you ask me what I believe about certain issues, I'll tell you. But I'm not I'm not looking to, to finger point at people or to alienate people, or I'm trying to, run a campaign that brings people together rather than a campaign that tries, that is based upon, that kind of tribalism of, of condemning people for, for ideologies that I don't necessarily agree with. If they're relevant to something I'm doing, I'll take that into consideration. And but I don't spend a lot of time sort of, I don't know. I really try to focus on how do you, where are the bridges where people can come together,
Well, I can understand that. I have this enterprise starting up in the Great Britain called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and we're trying to put together a positive vision for the future as opposed to the apocalyptic vision that's been circulating for some time now, and that's demoralizing young people to a degree that's almost incomprehensible. And I can understand your concern for putting forward a positive vision rather than for drawing distinctions. But by the same token, for example, in the universities, I've seen the diversity, equity, and inclusivity advocates take the enterprise over and destroy it. And there are some truly pathological ideas circulating in that realm of the ideological space. And I'm not saying I know the answer to this, because I have some sympathy for your desire to put forward a positive vision. But by the same token, it does seem to me to be incumbent upon the Democrats to draw a line. And I do think that one of the lines that should be drawn is with relationship to the notion of equity, because equity is a very pathological idea. And wherever it's been implemented around the world in the past, it's caused nothing but mayhem. And so anyways, I won't push that any farther because, I have some appreciation for your perspective.